Welcome back. This video will cover part 2 of Chapter 9, Industrial Organizational, Cognitive, and Human Factors Psychology for PSY 120, Careers in Psychology, Neuroscience, and Human Development. We concluded the first part of this chapter with talking about bachelor's level opportunities. How do you prepare for those bachelor's level jobs? In terms of psychology coursework, not all programs are going to have an IO psychology course. Some do. It really depends on the faculty that you have available. Nearly all psychology programs are going to have research methods and statistics, cognitive psychology and social psychology, and some degree of attention to ethics. More rarely will you have a course in IO or human factors psychology. Those are more likely to be found at large universities as opposed to smaller ones. Let me emphasize the research methods and stats piece. I have many former students who work in IO psychology, and I'll tell you, they make a whole lot more money than I do. They often are engaged in conducting, essentially, research projects. So they have to, if they're in design, they have to recruit people to interact with products, provide them with feedback in an iterative process of product development. Or if they're looking at market research, IO psychologists are often involved in that kind of work. They need to go out, recruit participants to provide information and feedback, analyze that data, present it to the client. Other kinds of coursework, obviously, since you're in the intersection between business and industry and psychology, business courses are going to be really helpful. If you want to go into the human resources space, human resource management is an obvious choice. Accounting, advertising, business, all of those are going to be helpful. If you're interested in that human factors, industrial design area, engineering courses can actually be helpful to you. If you're interested in the user experience space, computer science. It's not on this list, but it probably should be. Applied experiences, speaking specifically of internships or co-ops, something like that. Getting work in advertising, in offices, working with architects, working in an HR department, and so on. All of those can be really good places to get experience. In terms of research, if these are areas that are interesting to you, look for faculty who have interest in these research areas in human factors, in organizational behavior, in social psychology, and cognitive psychology. Those are going to be the most likely places where you're going to find faculty who are doing research that intersects these areas. So what kind of graduate opportunities are there? In human resources, there are professionals, and more, I keep saying this in every chapter, more and more we're seeing that master's degrees are being expected of certain kinds of professionals. So if you're talking about benefits managers, while you can still find entry-level positions where people come in with a bachelor's degree, it's becoming more and more likely for people who occupy positions like benefit managers for them to come in with an advanced degree of some kind. Now, many of these positions are still experience-based, so you have people who come in at the ground floor and then they are promoted. In some cases, though, you'll see job descriptions out there for human resource professionals, and a lot of times they're going to list, a master's degree in business administration or in human resources. Benefits directors, that's an administrative position, and they're going to oversee all of the managers. Communications managers, again, they're in an oversight position, so they're going to oversee staff who more directly communicate with employees. Communications directors are going to supervise those managers. So organizations tend to have a hierarchical structure. And you have a comm director who has responsibility over, say, 5 or 6 communication managers who each deal with their own departments and areas. That communication director has to look at the holistic picture of individuals working with several departments. There are what are called advanced human resources professionals as well, and these typically require an advanced degree. Being a director of human resources is sometimes an executive position in some organizations, but it's definitely seen as one of the key managerial positions within the organization. In large corporations, managing a human resources team is a daunting task. You're going to be ultimately held responsible for things like recruiting, compensation, benefits, employee relations, and so on. And these directors of human resources are going to report to a higher level person who's the chief executive of human resources. Chief human resources officers are basically the number one person in charge of human resources in the organization. These are typically executive level positions in those organizations. Some large corporations have talent management individuals who are responsible for recruiting, but also ongoing employee professional development. Some large corporations have directors of what's called employee experience and engagement. And these are individuals whose job it is to keep people positive in their work environment, to create strategies and experiences so that people enjoy their workplace. Obviously, not all organizations are going to have that. These tend to be positions within larger organizations. Getting these positions, maybe your likelihood of getting hired might be enhanced by having a master's degree in IO psychology, in addition to actual hands-on experience in those spaces. Keep an eye on the job ads. If you're interested in some of these advanced human resources positions, make sure that you know what the organization specifically is looking for, because there may be a preference for a business degree of some kind and specific certifications that may be sought out in these specific areas. Another graduate degree kind of area is in the broadly defined area of consulting. Consulting, it's basically people who engage in research and problem solving within organizations. So a consultant is routinely kind of brought in. They may work with a consulting firm, or they may work as an independent consultant with an IO degree. Sometimes these are people who come in specifically to do analyses of how the business is functioning. So they may be doing management analysis. They may be consulting, looking at the systems that the organization is based on, and then work with the organization to make them more competitive and efficient. There are also organizational development consultants, and these are individuals who might be brought in to work with the company in building teams, doing training, especially coping with change. So let's say there's been a major overhaul of the organization, new executives. They may bring in a consultant in organizational psychology to help with that transition. Some marketing consultants are going to advise companies in terms of how to push out market and products. My former students who work in IO, they are marketing consultants, and they work for marketing consulting firms. There are also people who are specialists in mediation. So if you have disputes and conflicts within your organization. It could be between individuals, it could be between teams or departments. Mediation consultants can come in and help to create solutions for those problems. And then finally, there are executive coaches. And this is a relatively recent phenomenon where you have individuals with an IO background frequently who work with executives to build and hone their leadership skills. There are even like executive boot camps, and in some cases, consultants will work with people who are moving up into executive status, or they are seeking executive status. They may work with an executive coach to build their skills so that they will be more attractive on the market as an executive. Usability specialists, and this is one of those higher demand jobs. It's also a very well-paying job with a median salary in 2022 of between $110,000 and $120,000 a year. Usability specialists are going to be the researchers who make sure that the product, as designed, is a good fit for the users. So you'll find usability specialists in every industry, whether you're making toys, electronic equipment, or cars. You're going to find them in each of those areas. Usability specialists are going to advocate for users. So if say Ford or Chevrolet brings in the usability specialist, they're coming in with the driver in mind, saying, how is the average driver, not a stunt driver, an average driver, going to interact with this interface? How is the average driver going to interact with this aspect of the vehicle? User experience strategists are, a specific case of usability specialists, and their job is going to be, as people interact with software or software within hardware, they're going to track and analyze how people interact with those objects or with those tools. So, for example, if you have a computer game, the usability specialist is going to use specialized equipment like eye tracking software, software that tracks every single movement that the user makes, and then do analyses to see whether or not the experience is matching what the creator, the designer of the piece of software intended. They're also going to look at how people perceive their interactions with those products as well. Psychologists looking at careers in these areas are going to be, heavily involved in research. So if this is something that is attractive to you, pay attention to the fact that these are research-based careers. And they involve designing studies, developing the skills for data analysis, and so on. An area that I find really interesting is design psychologists or environmental designers. Design psychology is probably something you've never heard of before, but it's a fascinating subdiscipline that involves multiple areas of psychology combined with, a little bit of engineering and even architecture built in. So design psychologists look at this relationship between environments and human psychology. And they want to understand why people find some spaces to be very comfortable and others to be daunting. I listened to a story a couple of years ago about a workplace, and they wanted to create a workplace that actually encouraged people to walk around the building and interact with people on different floors. So if you've ever been in a modern office building, they tend to be fairly linear. where you have this set of offices on floor 1, and they never interact with floor 2. That's a separate set of offices. And they never interact with floor 3. That's a separate set of offices. Well, this organization, they wanted to work with architects to redesign the space so that people would be encouraged to use the stairs and visit other floors, in hopes of sparking some creativity and some interaction. So what they did was they brought in some design psychologists who worked with the architecture firm to create this really welcoming flow and the welcoming positioning of the staircases, and also adding accessibility features to those staircases so that people with different kinds of disabilities could still use them. And they designed it in such a way that there were these little conversation spaces on the way up the stairs. And what they found was as soon as they put these newly designed front-facing stairs, ways of getting from one floor to the next, people spent more time moving throughout the building and actually talking to their colleagues. And it had these trickle-down positive effects of people were getting more exercise while they were in their workplace, and the people working there loved it. So that's a concrete example of the work of a design psychologist. They may be hired to design and improve environments. They may be hired from the outset to design new spaces for specific purposes. Design psychologists may be hired by corporations, by governments, but also by consulting firms. Some are going to be engaged in things like community planning, building design, working at the layout of structures, and so on. If you're interested in this idea of design psychology, it's a good idea to get some additional training in research, design, and statistics, but also there are some elements of urban planning, architecture, even kind of civil engineering that may be beneficial to you. Getting an internship with an environmental design firm or a city planning office can be a really good first step for testing out your interest in that area. There's also the whole world of the entrepreneur. Now, I'm not entirely sure why this is included as a graduate level option, other than if you probably did some research and looked at people who describe themselves as entrepreneurs. Most of them probably have an advanced degree, like an MBA, a Master's of Business Administration, or something like that. Not all do. Some entrepreneurs have no college education at all. That said, most do, and most go on to get some kind of advanced degree. Now, becoming an entrepreneur, someone who creates businesses, who creates organizations, having a background in industrial organizational psychology can be really helpful in doing that kind of work, because being an entrepreneur means you have to be able to do market research, to plan your business, to do financial planning, to do all of the legal compliance issues that are required of running a business. Becoming an entrepreneur, and like Mount Union has an entrepreneurship program. Not all schools do, but what you'll find is that, having courses in management and finance and marketing are going to be really helpful. The psychology background is an asset. Internships that you can seek out often involve co-op opportunities where you can really get hands-on experience and perhaps some mentorship from an entrepreneur who's already in business. Some educational considerations to keep in mind, as well as some master's level careers. All of the fields that we've discussed in this space There are people who have PhD degrees, but there are also people like the students that I described, my former students that I described, those that work in market research, they are master's level IO psychology graduates. There, you can seek PhDs in these areas. Master's degrees are also available. There are a lot of IO master's degree programs. You have to investigate them, make sure that they are focused on the things that you are interested in. Some of them are more on the industrial side, some are more on the organizational side. So be careful when you're looking at them to make sure that they meet your career goals. While doctoral degrees are going to open you up to being seen as qualified for academic work and advanced research positions in industry, a lot of the boots on the ground jobs in IO are master's degree jobs. As I said just a second ago, the couple of students that I've had who are now professionals in this area, they got master's degrees in IO psychology and went straight into market research jobs, and they are doing very well. And that concludes my coverage of Chapter 9.